The whispers and sideways glances followed Gertrude Tucker through the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs like a dark shadow. At 38 years old, with silver threads weaving through her once auburn hair, she had long ago been labeled a spinster by the gossips who had nothing better to do than count the years passing on other folks' lives. The year was 1878, and while the frontier town of Arizona Territory offered freedom in many ways, it still bound women with invisible chains of expectation. "Poor Gertie," Gertrude heard Mrs. Holloway mutter to Mrs. Peterson as she passed the general store. "Another birthday come and gone. Such a shame, too old now for any man to want her." Gertrude's spine stiffened, but she kept her head high. After burying both parents and raising her 3 younger siblings to adulthood, she'd earned every one of those silver strands. Her youngest sister had married just last spring, leaving Gertrude alone in the small house at the edge of town where she now ran a modest seamstress business. She'd made peace with her solitude, or so she told herself on the nights when the coyotes' howls echoed her own loneliness. She shifted the basket of fabric on her arm and quickened her pace. The new schoolteacher had commissioned a dress, and Gertrude needed to finish the measurements before sunset. As she rounded the corner past the saloon, the sounds of commotion drew her attention. "Papa, Papa." A small voice cried out. A child no more than 6 years old with dirt-streaked cheeks and wild blonde curls raced down the boardwalk. Behind him, a younger girl of perhaps 4 stumbled, trying to keep up on shorter legs. Gertrude instinctively reached out to steady the little girl as she nearly tumbled into the street. "Careful there, little one," she said gently. The girl looked up with enormous blue eyes swimming with tears. "We lost Papa," she whimpered. Before Gertrude could respond, thundering hoofbeats approached, and a tall man on horseback reined his mount to a halt beside them. Dust swirled around his weather-beaten boots as he dismounted in one fluid motion. "Daniel, Sarah." His voice was deep with worry. "What did I tell you about wandering off?" "Sorry, Papa," the boy mumbled, kicking at the dirt. The man knelt to embrace both children, then looked up at Gertrude. His eyes were startlingly blue beneath the brim of his worn Stetson, the same shade as his daughter's. A scar cut across his left cheekbone, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. Despite the trail dust coating his clothes, there was something undeniably dignified about him. "Thank you for stopping my girl," he said, standing to his full height. "Yates Young." "Just arrived from Colorado Territory." "Gertrude Tucker," she replied, suddenly conscious of the mending needle still stuck in her collar and the wisps of hair escaping her practical bun. "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs." The little girl tugged at her father's sleeve. "Papa, I'm hungry." Yates sighed, running a hand through his sun-bleached brown hair. "We haven't found a place to stay yet. The boarding house is full," Gertrude found herself saying. "The cattle drive brought in extra hands this month. That's what I heard." His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Something about the weary determination in his eyes moved Gertrude. "There's a small cabin behind the smithy that sometimes lets to travelers. I could show you." Relief washed over his face. "Much obliged, madam." As they walked together, the children scampering ahead, Gertrude learned that Yates had lost his wife to fever 2 years ago. He'd been working as a ranch foreman in Colorado until the operation was sold. Now he was seeking new prospects in Arizona. "It's not easy," he admitted, watching his children with tired eyes. "Being both mother and father to them." "I imagine not," Gertrude replied softly. The cabin turned out to be available, though barely large enough for the 3 of them. Gertrude left them settling in, but found herself thinking about the little family throughout the evening as she worked on the schoolteacher's dress. The next morning, while delivering fresh baked bread to the widowed missus Summers, Gertrude overheard the usual gaggle of town gossips outside the church. "Did you see the newcomer?" Mrs. Peterson's voice carried. "Handsome man, but those poor children, wild as weeds they are, no mother's influence. Someone ought to tell him the missionary society could place those children with proper families." Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "A man has no business raising little ones alone." Gertrude felt her temper flare. She'd seen the love in Yates's eyes when he looked at his children. Before she could think better of it, she rounded the corner and faced the women directly. "Those children have a father who clearly adores them," she said firmly. "Not every family fits your narrow view of proper, Mrs. Holloway." The women stared at her in surprise. Gertrude rarely engaged with their gossip. "Well," Mrs. Peterson recovered first, "someone's feeling spirited today. Perhaps you're sweet on the newcomer, Gertrude. At your age, how amusing." The other women tittered behind their hands and heat rushed to Gertrude's cheeks. "Decency isn't determined by age," she replied evenly, though her heart hammered. "Good day, ladies." She walked away with her head high, though their laughter followed her down the street. It wasn't the first time they'd mocked her for being past her prime, but it stung all the same. 3 days later, a knock at her door revealed Yates holding his daughter's torn dress. The little girl stood beside him, looking forlorn. "I'm afraid sewing isn't among my skills," he said apologetically. "The boarding house keeper mentioned you might be able to help." "Of course." Gertrude ushered them inside her small but tidy home. "It's a simple tier. I can mend it while you wait." While she worked, Sarah explored the sewing room with curious eyes, occasionally touching fabric samples with reverent fingers. Daniel had stayed behind with the blacksmith who'd taken a shine to the boy. "Your home is nice," Yates commented, his hat in his hands. "Reminds me of my mother's place back in Missouri." "Thank you, it's not much, but it's mine. That's something to be proud of." Many folks never own anything of their own. His eyes met hers with genuine respect that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she finished mending the dress, he insisted on paying her. "I don't take charity, Miss Tucker." "Gertrude, please." She accepted the coins. "And it's not charity, it's business," he nodded. "Gertrude, then, might you join us for supper tomorrow, as thanks? The children and I found rooms to rent above the livery, and there's a small cooking space. Nothing fancy, but I'd be delighted," she interrupted, surprising herself. After they left, Gertrude pressed a hand to her warm cheek. It was just a neighborly meal, she told herself. Nothing more. Supper with Yates and his children was chaotic but heartwarming. Daniel regaled her with tales of their journey from Colorado, while Sarah insisted on sitting beside Gertrude to show her a small rag doll. The stew Yates had prepared was simple but tasty, and Gertrude contributed a berry cobbler that earned her enthusiastic praise. "Miss Gertie makes the best desserts," Daniel announced, his face smeared with berries. "Even better than Aunt Milly's, and she was the best cook in Colorado Territory." Gertrude laughed. High praise indeed. After the children were tucked into bed in the small adjoining room, Yates poured coffee for them both. In the lamplight, with his features softened, he looked younger, the weight of responsibility temporarily lifted. "They like you," he said quietly. "They haven't taken to anyone that quickly since their mother passed." Gertrude warmed her hands on the coffee cup. "They're wonderful children, you've done well with them," he sighed. "I try, but there's so much I don't know. Sarah needs things I don't understand. And I work long days at the livery now, they're alone too much. Perhaps I could help sometimes," Gertrude offered before she could reconsider. "They could come to my place after school starts. I work from home and they'd be no trouble." The relief in his eyes was immediate and genuine. "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition if I'm offering," she smiled. "Besides, the house gets quiet with just me." And so began an arrangement that quickly became the highlight of Gertrude's days. 3 afternoons a week, the young children would burst through her door after school, filling her house with laughter and questions and the occasional squabble that she settled with a patience she hadn't known she possessed. Within a month, people noticed. The whispers changed tone. "Playing mother at her age," Mrs. Holloway commented loudly as Gertrude passed with Sarah's hand in hers. "Those poor children need a real family, not an old maid's fantasy." Gertrude's step faltered, but Sarah tugged her onward. "Why did that lady say you're old? You're not old like Grandpa was." Swallowing the lump in her throat, Gertrude managed a smile. Some people say unkind things when they don't understand. Papa says those people have pebbles for brains and we shouldn't listen, Sarah declared with such conviction that Gertrude couldn't help but laugh. That evening, when Yates came to collect the children, Gertrude mentioned the encounter. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she said as they watched the children playing in her small garden. "I don't want my reputation to affect you or the children." Yates's expression darkened. "Their opinions mean nothing to me. You've been a blessing to us, Gertrude." His hand covered hers briefly on the porch railing. "More than I can say." The touch sent warmth cascading through her, but she carefully withdrew her hand. She'd seen the way some of the younger widows in town looked at Yates. At 36, he was in his prime, while she— "Still," she said, "people talk and children hear. Let them talk." His voice was firm. "My children adore you, and that's what matters to me." As autumn painted the surrounding mountains with gold and crimson, Gertrude found herself increasingly entangled in the young family's life. She sewed new clothes for the growing children, helped Daniel with his reading, and taught Sarah simple embroidery stitches. When Yates was delayed at work, she fed them supper. When Sarah fell ill with a fever, Gertrude stayed up all night, applying cool compresses and whispering soothing words. It was during that long night, with Yates dozing in the chair across from her, that Gertrude realized with startling clarity that she had fallen in love. Not just with the children, though she loved them fiercely, but with their father as well. The realization terrified her. She was too old, too set in her ways too. Everything the town gossips claimed she was. When Sarah recovered, Gertrude tried to create some distance. She made excuses about orders to fill when Yates invited her to join them for the harvest festival. She suggested that perhaps the children should spend more time with their friends instead of at her house. Yates noticed, of course. One evening in late October, he arrived alone at her door. "The children are with Reverend Davis and his wife for supper," he explained. "I thought maybe we could talk." Nervously, she invited him in. The house felt different with just the two of them, smaller, more intimate. "Have I offended you somehow?" he asked directly, standing near the hearth where a small fire warded off the autumn chill. "No, of course not," she insisted, busying herself with the kettle. "Then why are you pulling away from us?" "From me," she set the kettle down with trembling hands. "It's not appropriate, Yates, the time we spend together, what people must think." "Since when do you care what people think?" His voice was gentle but insistent. "The woman who stood up to Mrs. Holloway doesn't strike me as one who bows to gossip. It's different now." She couldn't look at him. "I'm nearly 40, you're still young." "I'm 36, hardly a boy." He moved closer. "And what does age matter between friends?" The word friends pierced her heart. "That's just it. I fear my feelings have become complicated." The silence that followed made her finally look up. Yates was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Complicated how?" he asked softly. Gertrude took a deep breath. After a lifetime of caution, the truth spilled out. "I've grown to care for you too much, in ways that are foolish for a woman my age." To her astonishment, Yates smiled. "Thank God," he breathed. "I was afraid I was alone in this." Before she could process his words, he closed the distance between them. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, gently framed her face. "May I?" he whispered. At her nod, his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When they broke apart, she blinked up at him in wonder. "You can't possibly want me," she whispered. "I'm past my prime, the town's spinster." "The town is blind," he countered firmly. "I see a strong, kind, beautiful woman who has brought light back into my life and love into my children's." "Age is just a number, Gertrude. My feelings don't know or care about it." She wanted desperately to believe him, but years of hearing otherwise made it difficult. "People will talk. Let them." He kissed her again, more firmly this time. "I've spent 2 years doing what others thought best. Now I want to follow my heart." For the first time in her adult life, Gertrude allowed herself to hope. Their courtship unfolded slowly, deliberately, through the winter months. They were discreet but not secretive, sharing Sunday dinners and sleigh rides with the children, who seemed thrilled by the development. Of course, the gossip intensified. Gertrude overheard cruel comments about desperate old maids and men who settle for less. Each barb stung, but Yates's steady presence helped her weather the storm. When Mrs. Peterson loudly wondered what a virile man like Yates saw in a woman well past her childbearing years, Yates simply took Gertrude's hand in full view of the Sunday congregation and walked proudly out of church. "You shouldn't have done that," she admonished, though her heart soared at his defense. "I should have done more," he replied grimly. "Those women have nothing better to do than tear others down. You deserve better." As the harsh Arizona winter gave way to early spring, a new crisis emerged. Daniel came home from school with a bloody nose and torn shirt. "They said Papa only wants you because you'll be a free nursemaid," he sobbed as Gertrude cleaned his face. "They said you're too old to be a real mother and that you're just trying to steal our pa." Rage and heartbreak warred within her. "Who said these things?" "Tommy Holloway," Daniel mumbled. "He said his ma told him." That evening, after the children were asleep, Gertrude and Yates sat in grim silence at her kitchen table. "Perhaps this was a mistake," she finally said, tears threatening. "I won't come between you and your children." Yates's expression hardened. "The mistake was mine in allowing this poison to touch our family for so long." He reached for her hand. "Gertrude, I love you. The children love you. Everything else is noise." "Love isn't always enough," she whispered. "It is when it's real." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I was going to wait until Daniel's birthday next month, but I think now is the time." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I carved this myself. Not as fancy as a store-bought one, but it comes with my whole heart." Inside lay a simple gold band. Gertrude's breath caught. "I'm asking you to be my wife," Yates said softly. "To help me raise my children, to build a new life together, not because I need a nursemaid, but because I need you. Your strength, your kindness, your love. People will say you're making a mistake," she warned, even as joy bloomed within her. "Then they'll be wrong. Again." His smile was confident. "Say yes, Gertie, make me the happiest man in the territory." Through tears, she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will." The wedding was small but joyful, held in Reverend Davis's parlor rather than the church where so many judgmental eyes would watch. Sarah served as flower girl, sprinkling petals with enthusiastic abandon, while Daniel stood proudly beside his father as best man. Mrs. Summers and the blacksmith's family attended, along with a few other friends who had seen past the gossip to the truth of their relationship. Gertrude wore a dress of dove-gray silk that she'd sewn herself, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. When Yates saw her, the naked adoration in his eyes banished any lingering doubts. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," he whispered as they joined hands. The celebration afterward was simple but heartfelt. As dusk fell, they walked as a family to their new home, a small ranch property just outside town that Yates had been quietly repairing for months. "It needs work," he acknowledged as he carried her over the threshold, "but it's ours. Room for the children to grow, maybe even for our family to expand someday." The implication made her blush. "I may be too old for that," she warned. He set her down gently. "Then we'll cherish what we have. But miracles happen, Gertie. Look at us." That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, Yates and Gertrude discovered each other with tender passion that left no room for doubts or insecurities. Age melted away in the warmth of their embrace, and Gertrude felt truly beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life. The town's reaction to their marriage was mixed. Some, like Mrs. Holloway, doubled down on their disapproval, whispering behind fans about inappropriate matches and men who marry for convenience. But others, witnessing the genuine happiness of the new young family, began to reconsider their judgments. Summer brought an unexpected twist when Yates's sister arrived from St. Louis with her husband. Olivia Young Marshall was a forthright woman who took an immediate liking to Gertrude. "My brother has excellent taste," she declared over tea. "You're exactly what those children needed, What he needed too, though he was too stubborn to admit it for the longest time, Gertrude smiled. He's been a blessing to me as well. Olivia leaned forward conspiratorially. I heard about the town gossips from Reverend Davis's wife. Ridiculous old biddies, too old for love, as if love has an expiration date. The support from Yates's family strengthened Gertrude's confidence. By the time the harvest festival came around again, she walked proudly beside her husband, stepchildren dancing ahead of them, ignoring the stares and whispers that occasionally still followed them. The true turning point came unexpectedly in late autumn, when fever swept through Cottonwood Springs. The doctor was overwhelmed, and many families struggled to care for their sick. Without hesitation, Gertrude organized a rotation of helpers, turned her former home into a makeshift infirmary, and worked tirelessly preparing medicinal teas and broths. Mrs. Holloway's youngest grandchild was among the stricken. When all seemed lost for the little boy, it was Gertrude who stayed through the night, applying cold compresses and spooning broth between his parched lips until his fever broke. "You saved him, Mrs." Holloway whispered in dawn's early light, her formidable exterior cracked by exhaustion and gratitude. "After everything I said about you," Gertrude simply smiled. "Children are precious, all of them." Something shifted in the older woman's eyes. "Yes, they are." After a pause, she added, "You're a good mother to those young children. I was wrong about you." The admission, while not a full apology, marked a change. Gradually, the whispers faded. When spring arrived again, bringing with it Gertrude's 40th birthday, the celebration was attended by many townspeople who had once judged her harshly. And when, against all expectations, Gertrude discovered she was with child that summer, the news was met with genuine congratulations rather than scandalous gossip. Even Mrs. Peterson brought a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. "Every child deserves a warm welcome," she said stiffly, but with a hint of a smile. Gertrude's pregnancy was difficult at her age, but Yates was her constant strength. Daniel and Sarah hovered protectively, thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling. When her time came, the midwife was assisted by several women who had once mocked Gertrude for being too old, including Mrs. Holloway herself. "Push, dear," the older woman encouraged, holding Gertrude's hand firmly. "You're stronger than most women half your age." Yates Young entered the world with a lusty cry on a crisp December morning. She had her father's blue eyes and a dusting of her mother's auburn hair, unmarked by silver. When Yates brought the children in to meet their new sister, the look of wonder and pride on his face as he gazed at Gertrude made her heart swell. "You are magnificent," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "The strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." Daniel peered at the baby with solemn curiosity. "She's so small." "But she'll grow," Gertrude assured him, "and she'll need her big brother to protect her." Sarah clambered onto the bed carefully. "Can I hold her, Mama?" The word Mama still brought tears to Gertrude's eyes even after a year of marriage. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit beside me." As Sarah cradled her baby sister with Gertrude's guidance, Yates wrapped his arm around Daniel's shoulders. "This is what family looks like," he said. "Not what others think it should be, but what love makes it." By Grace's first birthday, the young ranch had prospered. Yates had added a new wing to the house, and Gertrude continued her seamstress business, now specializing in children's clothes and wedding dresses. The townsfolk who had once whispered behind her back now sought her advice and friendship. One afternoon, as Gertrude rocked Grace on the front porch while watching Daniel and Sarah play with their dog in the yard, Mrs. Holloway's buggy appeared on the road. Since the night of her grandson's recovery, the older woman had undergone a transformation of sorts, softening her judgmental ways. "I brought apple pie," she announced, climbing down with surprising agility for her 70 years. "And news. The Missionary Society has voted to establish a school for orphans here in Cottonwood Springs. We'd like you to serve on the board, Gertrude. Your experience with children is valuable." The irony wasn't lost on Gertrude. This same woman had once suggested Yates's children would be better off as orphans than with an old maid like her. But people could change. She herself had changed, growing from a woman who accepted others' limitations for her into one who defined her own path. "I'd be honored," she replied sincerely. After Mrs. Holloway departed, Yates joined Gertrude on the porch, taking sleeping Grace into his arms with practiced ease. "I heard," he said. "You've won over the dragon of Cottonwood Springs." Gertrude laughed softly. "People can surprise you." "You've surprised everyone," he replied, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "Except me. I always knew how extraordinary you were." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Gertrude reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a lonely spinster mocked for being too old for love to a wife, mother, and respected community member. "What are you thinking about with that beautiful smile?" Yates asked, squeezing her hand. "About how sometimes the most unexpected turns in life lead us exactly where we're meant to be." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And how love doesn't keep a tally of years." "No," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It just keeps growing one day at a time." As if to underscore his point, Daniel and Sarah raced up to the porch, clamoring for stories before supper. Grace stirred in her father's arms, reaching tiny hands toward her mother. Surrounded by the family she never expected to have, Gertrude Tucker Young knew with absolute certainty that life's greatest adventures often began when you stopped listening to those who claimed to know your limitations. Here, in this home built on love that defied convention, she had found not just purpose but joy. And that, she reflected as Yates winked at her over their children's heads, was worth every whisper, every judgment, every moment of doubt. Worth everything.